Okay, I think we're ready to go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome along to our audit committee this Friday morning. Can I start with any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, we have received apologies from Jocelyn Lyle and Roger Ridley.
Are there any declarations of interest in relation to any of the items on today's agenda? No, I'm seeing shaking of heads, so I'll take that as a no. Can we move on then to the minute of our previous meeting from June? Go through it for accuracy. Anything on what in the papers is page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, I'll assume we're happy that then is an accurate record. Are there any matters arising that don't come up elsewhere in today's agenda? Nope, I'm not seeing any hands, so we'll move on then to item 4, which is the audited accounts for 22-23. Stephen, are you leading off on this one?
Yes, please, Gordon. Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 4 is the audited annual accounts. The purpose of the report is to present the audited accounts to the Integration Joint Board or the accounts of the Integration Joint Board, I beg your pardon, for the year to the 31st of March 2023. There is a wee typo in the agenda that mentions it's financial year 23-23, but I can confirm it's 22-23. In terms of background, the draft annual accounts were submitted to our external auditors by the 30th of June deadline after they came to the audit committee back in June. And following the audit process, the IJB or an IJB committee charged with governance must meet to consider the audited annual accounts and approve those accounts for signature by the 30th of September. So all going well today. After this, we will then sign off the accounts through the sort of process with Audit Scotland. The annual accounts themselves have been audited. They're included within Appendix 1 for your reference, and the external auditor has provided an unqualified opinion on the accounts. Specific findings arising from the audit are reported as part of the external audit annual report, and you will find that in Appendix 2 to today's paper. After today, pending approval, then copies of the audited accounts will be posted to the partnership's website, and hard copies will be made available through local libraries. In terms of key findings, as I said already, the accounts provide an unqualified audit opinion. In terms of the wider scope and best value areas of the audit, the report highlights a number of ongoing risks in respect of financial sustainability, longer term risk sharing arrangements, financial management and best value. There are 7 specific improvement recommendations included in the report. 5 are follow-up recommendations from the prior year, and 2 new ones. One of the follow-up recommendations is now complete, so there are effectively 6 recommendations outstanding. All those recommendations have been agreed by the Chief Officer and by myself, and they are summarised in the table on pages 11 and 12 of the agenda. Gillian is here from External Audit today as well, should there be any further questions, but I will pause at that, take us back to the recommendations, which are for the Audit Committee to approve the audited annual accounts for the IJB for the financial year to the 31st of March 2023, and to consider the external audit annual report that is attached at Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Gillian, is there anything you want to add at this stage?
Stephen covered a lot of it. I can go through what I was going to say if that's of any help, just pulling out some of the key points. Stephen did cover quite a bit of it, but I can do that quickly if that's helpful.
That'd be great, thank you.
So as Stephen mentioned, this is our annual report for the 22-23 audit of the IJB, and it covers both the audit of the financial statements, but also our work to address our wider audit dimension responsibilities. So before maybe going on to the report, if I could just pause here to ask if anyone is aware of any instances of known, suspected or alleged frauds, and of any non-compliance with the relevant laws and regulations. So that's a requirement of the auditing standards for us to ask this at both points in the year. Usually feels like a bit of a tense moment at wedding where any objections. So I'll just stop for a second and see if anybody. No, nothing. That's great. That's obviously good news. So then just quickly to run through some bits of the report. As Stephen mentioned, the most important thing to confirm with you is that it is an unmodified or unqualified opinion. So it's a fully clean opinion, and the proposed audit opinion is included in the accounts that we've just went through. And following today's meeting, the accounts will be signed by the appropriate officers at the IJB and then by ourselves as well. So the accounts were provided within the agreed timescale. They were of a good standard, and as you'll see at paragraph 20 to 22, there were no significant findings from our audit of the accounts. Just to mention that Exhibit 3, at the planning stage of the audit, we identified a significant risk of material misstatement, and that was in relation to potential fraud caused by management override of controls. This is in all of our plans and all of our audits, and we designed audit procedures to address this, and from the work undertaken, no issues were identified. And then at paragraph 25, we identified a risk of material misstatement, which was not significant but still considered a risk, and that was in relation to the presentation and accounting treatment of the COVID funding, which was being returned to the Scottish Government, and we were satisfied with how it was included in the accounts. At paragraph 27, as Stephen mentioned, we also reviewed the recommendations or action plan points brought forward from the outgoing external auditor, Ernst & Young. So we were able to close off the one in relation to the medium-term financial plan, and then we got an updated position on the others, and we concluded limited progress had been made because we weren't able to kind of close any more off. Section 2 is where we go on to talk about our wider audit dimension responsibilities from there on in the report. So I won't go through this in a lot of detail. So it's just to mention that we were able to include that the IJB had effective and appropriate financial management arrangements in place. In terms of financial sustainability, as mentioned, the IJB has developed a medium-term financial plan, and they have developed savings plans for 23-24, so that's a positive step. The recommendation is simply that in order to remain financially sustainable going forward, the IJB should review service delivery models so that they can identify recurring savings rather than non-recurring, and we've seen that again across a lot of public sector bodies. So section 3, vision, leadership and governance. We found governance arrangements to be appropriate, and they support effective scrutiny and challenge and informed decision making. So the other further recommendation that we've raised there, just to explain, so this came out of a review of the governance statement, and while we recognise the various ways that the board receives assurances over governance arrangements, the process where the IJB receives confirmation of year-end balances from partner bodies, we're just recommending that that could be expanded to include assurance over their systems of internal control and governance arrangements. We see that in other IJBs. I can't vouch for them all, but I have seen that in a few, and it just would strengthen that process a bit more. And then last section 4, about the use of resources to improve outcomes. We were able to include our appropriate arrangements to secure best value through the various plans and strategies and monitoring in place. And then lastly, while we have commented that the board's performance is below the Scottish average in some areas, we're satisfied that there are arrangements in place for performance management, and where they're not making targets, how to address that. So I'll just stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions on anything.
Okay, thank you both. That's really helpful. And it's always good to have an unqualified set of accounts. It's always the first thing I look for. There are a few improvement actions there, none of which I think are any great surprise to us. and some of which, as Stephen has remarked, have been worked upon. Reserves overall dropped by 8 million or so, but we knew that was going to happen because of the return of some of the COVID funding to Scottish Government, so that was no real surprise. Although I think we do know there are challenges in future years, and that's pretty much common to all IGBs right now in terms of future funding direction, demand going up, etc. So again, I don't think that's too much of a surprise, but it is very useful to have it put down in such a clear fashion. So thank you everyone involved. I think that's a good piece of work. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to raise? Nope, I'm not seeing any hands. Can we then approve the accounts?
Approved.
Yeah, approved. Okay, thanks again, everyone. Can we move on then to item 5, which is the internal audit review of IGB directions? Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So item 5 is, as you say, is to present the findings of internal audit review of IGB directions, and to present the action plan to address the recommendations arising from that audit review. The audit itself was conducted as part of the 2021-22 internal audit work programme, and a final report, including management actions, was actually released over a year ago, back in May 2022. It should have been presented to the Audit Committee in either June or September last year. However, due to staffing changes, specifically a change in Chief Finance Officer, there has been an error made, and the report is only now coming formally to the Audit Committee for approval. In terms of section 4.1, basically that reiterates just what I've said in terms of the sort of executive summary, that it should have been back in May, but due to the change in the Chief Finance Officer, it's only now coming. And it also highlights in there that the audit work was conducted remotely. Section 4.2 notes that the report provided limited assurance, and that several improvement actions were identified. Those actions are summarised in table 1 on the following page, along with the original management response and the original timelines. Now, when we move to section 5, you will see that in terms of the current position, while the report hasn't actually been presented to the IGB Audit Committee previously, I had assumed that it had been reported to the Audit Committee, and I've been quite merrily providing updates on progress through the Governance Statement Improvement Actions Report, which is another one of our regular reports that come to the Audit Committee. And the latest update will be further on today's agenda. Now, those updates have noted very limited progress against the directions recommendations, and the latest report further on the agenda will note the intention to review timelines for this action plan once the integration scheme review has been finalised. So very much a lot of the directions requirements will flow from having an up-to-date integration scheme. So that is the recommendation within this report. So I won't dwell too much on this report. I'm perhaps slightly embarrassed about it. But I will go back to the recommendations, where I'm asking the Audit Committee to note the findings from now formally note the findings from the internal audit report that was produced over a year ago, that are summarised in section 4, and to note the directions action plan with the intention to reset timelines once the current integration scheme review is concluded. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how this managed to happen. I remember we did have a number of different sets of recommendations that we combined into one overall report because it made sense to look at them all together. and somehow we've managed to include the recommendations without ever actually approving the original report, which is a bit odd, but I guess the good thing is the actions are there and are being worked upon, so it's not as if it's sat on a shelf doing nothing for a year and a half. I think the tie-in with the review of integration scheme is going to be key there, to get that right. Do we have any idea what the time scale for the integration scheme review is? Patricia, are you coming in on this one?
Yes, thank you. We're in discussion, as members of the committee will probably be aware. The integration scheme is the agreement between the Health Board and the Council that supports how the IGB will operate the Integration Joint Board. So it's an area for discussion across the two organisations, but also with input from myself and from the IGB. So it's linked in as well to the escalation improvement plan for NHS Forth Valley. Stirling and Clickmannanshire IGB are also due to review their schemes. We're not in a particularly different position to many of the IGBs. This work was really postponed during COVID, but I'm in discussion with both the chief executives just in the last 2 days about the programme for this, and we're just looking to finalise the timeline for having the work completed. The scheme will incorporate the arrangements for the coordinated services, also the directions as well. So there's a fair bit of work to go on across not just our partnership, but also to synchronise with Stirling and Clickmannanshire. But we are very keen to get this work completed as soon as that is practical, but just finalising that timeline. Thanks.
Thanks, that's useful. I know there are a number of complicating factors around all of this, but it's good to hear progress has been made. Okay, does anyone else have any questions or comments on the report? Okay, are we happy to approve the recommendations? Okay, thank you. Item 6 then is the strategic risk register.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that last one's over because that hides my embarrassment. That was definitely an overlap between the two chief finance officers. So agenda item 6 is the strategic risk register. You will have seen Sarah McKenzie join us for this part of the meeting. I want to thank Sarah for joining us because she's actually trying to flip between 2 separate meetings this morning, but she's here as backup should I face any difficult questions on the deep dives that have been undertaken, but I'll come to that shortly. So in terms of the report itself, it's an update on IGB's strategic risk register. There have been no new risks added to the register since the version that we previously presented to the Audit Committee on the 16th of June earlier this year. They're following deep dive reviews of strategic risk 9 and 10. Risk 10 has been downgraded to an organisational risk. It's no longer a strategic risk, and consequently there are now 9 live risks recorded within the register. 1 is classed as very high risk, 7 are considered as high risk, and 1 as a medium risk. I'll skip through the background, but I think the key there is that the strategic risk register is routinely reviewed. It's updated by the partnership senior leadership team, and it comes to the audit committee, every audit committee on a quarterly basis, and it's presented biannually to the IGB board meeting as well. So the paper we see today will also go to the IGB board later this month. Section 4.1 is similar to the sort of overview at the very start, highlighting the 10 and now 9 strategic risks. It also notes that we have undertaken a programme of deep dives, including strategic risk 1 as well as 9 and 10, and I will come to that in section 5. In terms of the table under section 4.1, we will see that 8 of the 9 risks, there are no change to the current risk rating, and it's the 9th risk where there has been a deterioration and the risk rating has gone up from high to very high. The actual detailed risk register itself is provided at Appendix 1, so it's just a summary table in section 4.1, but the full register's within Appendix 1, and that should be read in conjunction with the risk assessment scoring matrix which can be found within Appendix 2. There are a number of bullet points in section 4.3 which just reinforce or reassure the committee that we have reviewed the risk register in detail, and these are some of the factors that we considered when we came up with the current scorings. I won't dwell on them just now, but the last one, which is at the top of page 110 on the papers, just notes that there was also a further deep dive that was undertaken on health and safety, but that was deemed to be an operational rather than a strategic risk, so I wasn't planning to say any more about that in terms of today's agenda item. So on to the deep dives. This is the part of the report that will be new and won't have been part of previous format. We have started the programme of deep dive. They're predominantly there, first of all, to make sure that there's rigour to the individual assessments, but also to assure the audit committee that risk management arrangements are operating effectively. So I've put quite a bit of detail into this section just to give that assurance to the audit committee today. The corporate risk management team, Sarah and her colleagues, were involved with the deep dive reviews of risk 9 and 10. Sarah was also directly involved with the deep dive review on risk 1, which is financial stability, sustainability, I beg your pardon. So the financial sustainability risk is outlined within section 5.2. I thought it would be helpful just in the first paragraph to remind the audit committee of what that risk is specifically. And so if the IJB strategic plan and if our medium-term financial plan aren't prepared on a sustainable basis, there is a risk that our recurring cost base will exceed our available funding. That could adversely impact both current and future service provision and could impact on our ability as an IJB to deliver on our strategic priorities and on the vision outlined within the strategic plan. So that's the risk. Sections 5.22 through to 5.26 provide some background before we look into the deep dive. I think it's helpful to understand why finance is a risk. So it's kind of done in a chronological order here. I started off with in 5.22 the 2022-23 unaudited accounts, but I guess now that we've considered item 4 in today's agenda, the figures are the same in the audited accounts. So last year we did have a net underspend of £3.4 million on the integrated budget. That underspend included various underspend within social care, community health care, partly due to delays in delivering on new initiatives, but there were also widespread vacancy savings. I think we mentioned at the previous audit committee that there is a distinction between financial sustainability and financial balance. So I think in terms of that financial balance, it's really helpful that we've had a significant underspend last year, but do bear in mind that's not the same as being financially stable. And if we do have staffing underspends, then that means we don't have the correct cohort of staffing to deliver on our priorities. But from a financial balance perspective, at least, it's certainly positive. There were overspends. I've highlighted prescribing, complex care and night nursing. And the final thing from that paragraph, at least, is to note that in terms of those variances, a number of them will continue into the current year, or that would be my expectations at least. So there's in terms of financial balance, at least there's a number of positive messages coming into the current year, although that may be short term and might not be the longer term outlook. Paragraph also notes that in terms of set aside, that's managed, the overspend pressures managed by NHS Forth Valley, by the Director of Finance, and that's set to continue into the current year as well. So beyond that, we then look at the business case for the current financial year and the medium-term financial plan, and they highlighted a potential funding gap in the current year of nearly £13.5 million, rising annually by roughly £2 million per annum thereafter. We do have a savings programme that's been identified, but there are risks within that, and the paragraph specifically highlights that in terms of that RAG rating, almost half of our savings proposals had a red risk rating, often linked to our capacity to deliver the saving and recruitment challenges, particularly around the prescribing initiatives that were part of that plan. The plan also included non-recurring savings of £2.829 million, and again that was referred to by Gillian in terms of the external audit report and the current non-recurring savings and the need in the longer term to find recurring savings to address that balance. 524 just notes that in terms of our local partners, they're also seeking to make substantial savings, and that obviously has potential consequences for us, given that they are both our core funding partners. 525 just notes that nationally, once all the IJBs had concluded their business cases for the current year, the information was consolidated. There are significant savings to be made across IJBs across the whole of Scotland in the current year, ranging between 1% and 9% of their budgeted programme, averaging 3.6%. The pressures I outlined in there are consistent across most of Scotland, and they're certainly ones that we would recognise too. And finally, in terms of that background, it's just worth highlighting that Audit Scotland have also completed a series of reports with the conclusions that we are in difficult times, that inflation is remaining stubbornly higher than previously expected. There's a need to focus on prevention, a need to look at service redesign and a resetting of public services, and working in collaboration to get through this quite challenging and difficult period. So I hope that background was helpful for the Audit Committee to the finance sustainability risk. In terms of the deep dive itself, Sarah, myself and our business management coordinator met on the 28th of June to go through the finance risk in further detail. I did mention earlier that all the risks are contained within Appendix 1. The additional information that was included as part of the deep dive has been left on the detailed strategic risk register. It's highlighted in red if you've got a coloured copy of the papers, so you'll recognise what I'm about to go through, hopefully from that detailed appendix. So as part of the review, each control was classed as being either preventative to stop the risk from happening in the first place, or contingent, or potentially a mixture of both. There were also some controls that are deemed to be assurance activities, so they won't prevent the risk and they won't improve what's happening when the risk has happened, but they're there as part of our sort of monitoring and assurance to make sure that we understand the extent of the risk. There are 9 current controls. 5 were deemed to be preventative, 2 were a combination of preventative and contingent, and 2 were classed as assurance activity. Regarding the future or further controls, there were 6 of them around financial sustainability, 5 were preventative and contingent, and 1 was an assurance activity. Similarly, we then considered how critical each of these controls were, and for the current controls we found that 7 were absolutely critical, 3 have been classed as very important, and 5 as important. The next stage of the review considered the effectiveness of each of the controls that are in place, and we concluded that 6 controls were mostly effective, 2 were partly effective, and 1 wasn't deemed to be effective. Now, this was the first time I'd done a deep dive exercise personally. I was a bit surprised initially that there were none that were fully effective, but I guess the explanation for that is if the controls were fully effective, there would be no risk. So mostly effective is the highest category we're likely to see there. Section 5.1.12 just notes that in terms of the risk, there are a number of categories to consider. It's not just about financial position, which is partly on the table on the second page, but there's also in terms of the risk, how it impacts on patient or service user experience, projects, injury, illness, and so forth. So the table just identifies the impact against each of these the standard risk categories that we assess all risks against. Up, sorry. And then finally in 5.2.13, there's just a note that in terms of those different risk ratings, the risk rating then determines how often we ought to be reviewing the risk. So for a medium risk, we would review the risk on a quarterly basis, but for a high risk rating, the expectation would be that the risk is reviewed on a monthly basis, and that monitoring will continue through the senior leadership team and through myself as the Chief Finance Officer. So that was the sort of hopefully relatively comprehensive overview of the deep dive into Strategic Risk 1. You might be pleased to hear that I don't plan today to go through in Risk 9 and Risk 10 in the same level of detail. The format and structure of this report's the exact same. A bit of background first of all, and then the actual deep dive review. So I'll just bring us back, if I may, to the recommendations. And the recommendations are that we consider and comment on the high-level summary of the Strategic Risk Register that's presented in section 4.1. We consider and comment on the detailed Strategic Risk Register within Appendix 1, and we note the deep dives outlined in section 5 of the report and consider the assurance that these provide to the Audit Committee that risk management processes are effective and in place. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, it's a very helpful report. In relation to 9 and 10, I can see the sense in splitting the strategic and the operational risk there. That makes perfect sense to me. I think having that level of detail on the deep dive is also very helpful. I think it gives us a greater sense, not just of what the risk is, but how the controls are operating. As you say, lots of them being partially effective is, I guess, what you expect in the real world. There is so much of the risk we can mitigate or treat, but we are still in a difficult financial position moving forward. As you say, that's common with pretty much every other IJB in the country, which in some ways is not a good picture, but it's useful to know that we're not out of step, even if not out of step is a difficult position, if that makes sense. I think in terms of moving forward, I mean, you're right to bring back to Tony's point about sustainability and balance. It's good in a financial sense that we have savings there, but if those savings mean we're unable to deliver the service, then that's clearly not a good thing. So there is a need, I think, to look at where savings are recurring and non-recurring. And as you've highlighted, we have had an issue a number of times that many of the savings have been non-recurring, which gives us, in some ways, kicks the can down the road, doesn't it? It makes things in future years more difficult, and we know that there is pressure to come. So it is very useful to have that level of detail and to know that the high level of risk means a higher monitoring of the controls and the risks so that we keep on top of it. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Sarah, for that work. Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really just two questions. One, touching on what you've already spoken about, the underspend of 3.412 million, and part of it is obviously due to vacancies. Do we have a value on what that amount is and how it's tracking? In other words, I appreciate that vacancies are sometimes hard to fill, but I'm assuming, you know, that there must be new people coming in. So it'd be good to know what the value is and how that's tracking, you know, to touch on what Stephen said regarding sustainability and balance. And then I have a second question I'll come back to in a second, Chair. Thank you.
Stephen, can you come back on that first point?
Yeah, I think I'll probably need to come back to Councillor Flynn on that particular one, because it's spread across a whole number of different areas. So
okay,
rather than just say here is the value, it'd probably be better trying to pull together a summary of the different underspends on staffing in a number of different areas.
Okay. That's fine.
What I would say is that we have made considerable efforts, and when I say we, I mean the IJB as a whole, certainly not myself, to recruit to vacancies. Some of our sort of new developments that we've tried to put in place were to try to make recruitment more attractive, to encourage people into the area. We had an extensive advertising campaign last year. We had targeted media advertising going out through through the media. Might be better not mention the companies in a public forum like this, but all of that was aimed at trying to improve our recruitment. We tried to over-recruit in a number of areas, knowing that there will be further turnover. So we've taken extensive efforts, but through all that, we are still finding a high level of turnover, and in a number of areas, we're finding that as quickly as we recruit, and even as we've improved the recruitment, there still remains that turnover, and the position means that we've still got a large number of vacancies. But I'll certainly come back to you with the values around that.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. And the second question, Chair, is really, I hope I explain it right, but with regard to the risks and the monitoring of these risks, you know, very high and high, medium, etc. I just wonder what is in place. Because taking medium risks, quarterly monitoring, now risk can go up or down, as we all know. What's in place should a risk move into a higher category, so that we're not waiting 3 months to monitor and update it? You know, what is the process behind the scenes? Thanks. Hope that makes sense.
Sarah, is that one you can answer for us?
Yeah, and apologies, my camera's just stopped working. That's why I've turned it off. I'm not trying to hide. So the risks would get reviewed and monitored in line with our timescales, so depending on what category they fall in. But there's also a mechanism there for if there's any significant change, for us to be able to react to that and come in and make an update to it. So, for example, if a risk is sitting in the yellow range, which would be classed as a sort of medium risk, and we know that something's happened, then we'll come in early and say, right, so we've heard that something's happened here, what does this mean for the risk? And we'll do the review to see if the score's gone up and down. That way that we can keep the reporting up to date and make sure it's a bit more active in terms of monitoring and reviewing the risks. But it is something that we're kind of looking at, certainly from within NHS Forth Valley, within my role here, trying to make sure that we can see what the progress has been across a 6-month or a 3-month period, because actually you might not see much movement between quarters, but there might have been things happening in between times. So, for example, that primary care sustainability risk, there have been things that have happened in between times around transitional payments, which may have reduced the risk score in between times. But then if it's not a sustainable means of ensuring sustainability, then the risk goes back up again. So it's just trying to find ways of making sure that that progress can be viewed. So we'll look at the reporting. It's not something I've spoken to Stephen about yet, but I would be looking at the reporting to make sure that you can see a trend across all of those reviews, so you're not just seeing like March to June or June to October or whatever. You see what's happened in between times as well, and that should also give the committee a wee bit more assurance that around what's happening in those interim periods. But I don't know if that answers your questions, but yes, we would, as a risk team, we would sort of keep on top of any changes, and we would expect the risk leads to do that as well, so that we can pick up if there's particularly a deterioration in a risk.
Okay, no, that does answer my question, and thank you, because obviously things can and hopefully not change quickly, but can also change in the positive sense. You know, they can move from medium to low, and so less time would needed to be spent on it if it's moved into a lower category. No, thanks, Sarah, that's very good, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jim. No, it is a really good point. What we're seeing is a kind of quarterly snapshot of what is a dynamic process. So having that information about the trends and just keeping on top of where things are increasing or decreasing, I think is very important. Anything else on risk then? Okay, can we agree the recommendations that Stephen's outlined in the report?
Agreed.
Great, thanks very much, and thanks for your input, Sarah. Item 7 then is the internal audit progress report.
Thank you, Chair. I will take this one. Now, I have to apologise because I didn't realise Jocelyn wasn't able to attend today, so I'm not quite as prepared as I may, well, hopefully I am for the other papers. So item 7 is the internal audit progress report. It includes details of progress against both the 2022-23 and 2023-24 internal audit annual plans. It also includes details of relevant Falkirk Council and NHS Forth Valley internal audit reports, so that we can look across our partners to see if there's any relevant information that we should be applying internally to. The 2023-24 internal audit programme was approved by the audit committee at our meeting in March this year, and the 2022-23 audit plan was approved last September, so it was a bit later last year, and that was reflecting various capacity challenges and delays within the wider system. Both progress on both those plans is contained within the Appendix 1. The Appendix 2 summarises the relevant reports from our partner bodies. Section 4 of this report provides an update on the various items that are within the audit plans. I won't go through any of that just now, but there is one that I would like to draw to your attention, and that is in sections 4.9 and 4.10. Part of the current year, the 2023-24 audit plan included an item FK 524, which was a review of our external providers and the controls around that particular framework. After discussion between Jocelyn and myself, we would like to change that programme. We're mindful that our external audit last year, and Gillian's referred to it in the current year as well, part of that was a request that our audit committee, ourselves, do a self-assessment against SIPFA's or best practice guidance essentially. So after discussions between myself and Jocelyn, we would like to ask for Jocelyn's support, our internal auditor support, to help us through that exercise, and we thought that was a greater priority currently. So that's the proposed change to the current year audit plan. Beyond that, I think hopefully the report is relatively self-explanatory. I apologise to anyone who may not see the colours in Appendix 1, but basically all the blocks that you see are green, showing that progress has been achieved in the relevant areas, and the bits that aren't coloured in have still got future deadlines, November 23 for example, and so forth. We weren't quite clear. We'd certainly welcome Audit Committee's views on the amount of detail in Appendix 2. Jocelyn was concerned that we might have given too much information. I was quite happy that it's better to have too much than too little. So, you know, if the Audit Committee does have any views on the level of detail in Appendix 2, which are the reports that are of audits of our partners, then I'd certainly welcome that feedback. But other than that, I'll just take us back to the recommendations. And there are 3 recommendations. That the progress on the 22-23 and 23-24 annual internal audit plans is noted, and that's within Appendix 1. That we agree the proposed amendment to the 23-24 annual internal audit plan, and that we note the summaries of relevant reports from partner bodies set out at Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. I found Appendix 2 very useful, particularly in the key findings. And obviously there are a lot relate to the individual bodies and not to the IJB, but it's good to see where there are crossover and where there are common issues. I think there are some that come out there. Anyone else have comments or questions? No, Stephen?
Yeah, sorry, apologies. I should have mentioned that, just for the records perhaps, that Tony Gaskin was our lead auditor previously. He's now retired, and Jocelyn has been confirmed as the audit lead now. So Jocelyn Lyle, who is unable to make it here today, is now our audit lead, and certainly in the past I've had good working relationships, I believe, with Jocelyn, so I think it'll be very helpful in terms of that continuity and understanding of the IJB and our systems and our processes and our functions. But I should probably mention that at the start, that Jocelyn is the new Tony Gaskin. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure she would appreciate that particular way of putting it, but I know what you mean, Stephen. Yeah, I think that continuity is useful, that we have someone who is relatively up to speed and isn't going to take a while to get their head around the way that things operate, so that's useful. I'm certainly happy with the recommendation to spend some of the audit time on the self-assessment. I think that's a very valuable piece of work for us to do. If everyone else is happy with that and the other recommendations.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, with that being approved, then we'll move on to item 8, which is the National Audit Report and Inspection Overview. Stephen, is this yourself again?
Yeah, I'm afraid you've got me throughout the whole of today's agenda. So yes, so this is it's one of our standard reports again. It's the overview of national audit, scrutiny and inspection reports that have been published since our previous audit committee meeting back in June. There are a total of 8 reports that have been, or 8 relevant reports that have been published since the last meeting, 3 by the Care Inspectorate, 3 by the Mental Welfare Commission and 2 by Audit Scotland. If I just move down to section 4, there is a table within section 4.1 which lists the 2 Audit Scotland reports. Within the title of each report, you will see there's an embedded link that actually takes you to the Audit Scotland website where the full report is available. And section 4.2 just notes that for that first report, the link also takes you to a short Audit Scotland video that provides a summary overview, and I think that video is quite helpful and relevant if members have the opportunity to have a look at that at their convenience. So the report, it was entitled Local Government in Scotland Overview 2023. It's the third and final overview report in a series that was looking at how the pandemic affected councils and their performance. It considered current and future challenges facing local government and how well placed councils are to deal with those current and future challenges. The report itself drew conclusions from 2021-22 audits and from performance and best value audits. It highlighted a very challenging situation with demand and workforce pressures deepening, with forecast funding reductions, and concluded there's a need for strong leadership, radical change and collaborative working. The report itself includes a number of exhibits and case studies, and in the text here I've really just highlighted some of the ones that I thought might be of most interest to ourselves. Specifically, it describes signs of a crisis in adult social care, with growing backlogs, declining satisfaction and an unclear position in terms of demand and unmet need. Also of relevance was the reference to delayed discharges, which are a sign of capacity challenges within the wider system, and it notes that delayed discharges are at their highest level since current guidance came into place back in 2016. So particularly relevant to us. So the report touches on workforce challenges, funding, ring-fence resources and the new deal for local government. So there's a lot in that particular report. Conversely, I've only included one paragraph of background to the other Audit Scotland report, which was Falkirk Council's annual audit plan for 2022-23. Basically, the report is very similar in structure and style to Audit Scotland's annual audit plan for our own IJB accounts, which we tabled at our last audit committee back in June. So it highlights the planned work would include audit the annual accounts, provision of an independent auditor's report, and then the wider scope areas and best value considerations. And we've already seen what that means in terms of ourselves with agenda item 4. So I won't dwell on that any further. In terms of the 6 inspection reports, they're listed in the table in section 5.1. And they will be considered further by the Clinical Care Governance Committee in due course. So just back to the recommendations, the Audit Committee is asked to consider and comment on the content of this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, there is a lot in the local government report, none of which I think is terribly surprising, but it is difficult reading. The one thing that I would slightly query is the unclear position in relation to demand and unmet need. I think we're fairly clear that demand is rising and that complexity within that demand is increasing year on year. So, you know, I think we may not know the exact quantum of unmet need, but we know that it's going up every year at a rate higher than it ever has, which is part of the core issue in terms of the financial sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. There's significant challenges there. Absolutely. I think it won't be in today's agenda, but come the next IJB board meeting, when we look at the finance report, I think it mentions in there an 18% rise in care at home activity year on year. So yeah, we're certainly aware of significant challenges. And perhaps we are able to quantify them to a degree. I think there's probably still some work required in terms of how we address the delayed discharges and the sort of the best flow to stop people coming into hospital in the first place, make sure people are living as healthily at home as possible. But I'm in danger of going on a soapbox here, so I better be quiet. Sorry, apologies.
Thanks, Stephen. Any other comments or questions? No, we're happy to accept the recommendations.
Yep.
Thank you. That brings us then to item 9, which is the governance statement improvement actions.
Okay, so thank you. So this provides an update on progress to implement a range of improvement actions identified both through the annual governance statement and from various internal and external audit report recommendations. Down in section 4.1, you will see that in the actual detailed appendix itself, we have grouped the improvement actions into 4 broad categories, namely progress with the integration scheme and MSG self-assessment, implementation of the SIPFA financial management codes, audit committee self-assessment against good practice principles, and then the other internal and external audit reviews. Section 4.2 just highlights that within the appendix there is a RAG rating. That RAG rating is in respect of target completion time, where green would indicate that we expect to complete the actions broadly in line with original timelines. Amber would indicate some slippage in target completion, and red would indicate significant slippage in target completion dates. So the RAG ratings around the timelines essentially. There are also further comments in the appendix too. In terms of some of the main things, section 4.3 notes that in terms of integration scheme and the MSG self-assessment, that the appendix itself does have an estimated timeline of December 23. Patricia mentioned earlier that there's still significant work going on there, so that's certainly an indicative timeline for when we hope to have the works done, and we will know more about that as the work progresses with our partner organisations. These are, though, a key area of focus for NHS Forth Valley's Integration Action Plan. Scottish Government resource has also been secured to support the process, and the NHS Assurance Board has advised that integration and leadership culture are now the 2 areas of primary focus in terms of the sort of level 4 NHS escalation. In terms of the SIPFA financial management action, nothing's changed there, and the timeline remains as previously suggested. The audit committee self-assessment we've touched on in the earlier committee item, and we've now, with your approval, engaged the support of internal audit as part of a revised internal audit action plan for the current year. In terms of the other items, the internal audit annual assurance report, which was presented just to our last audit committee, that has now been added to section 4, the other internal and external audit reviews within appendix 1. Within that particular report, there were 7 recommendations, and management actions have been produced for 6 of them, with the final one in respect of workforce still to be completed. We'll complete that as a priority, and then we will circulate, as we previously intimated, we will circulate the internal audit 2022-23 annual assurance report once all 7 actions are there. There was an update on that recently at the IJB board development session, so you'll know that that is progressing and what we're doing there. That's all I was going to say. I wasn't going to touch on the detail appendix itself. I will just briefly mention that if you were to look at the appendix, it's similar in structure and format to before. But if you were looking at section 4, the other internal and external audit reports, one of our internal audit recommendations had been to improve some of the metrics within the governance statement report. And so we've started to develop that in here. And if you were looking, for example, at risk management, the first one that I can see, it identifies that risk management action plan had 6 key actions, that 2 of those actions are now fully completed and the 4 remaining actions are either partially complete or in progress. Likewise, for the resilience and business continuity, it notes the 7 actions, and I think it was 7 actions, well, it was 7 recommendations again from the internal audit annual assurance report. The only one where I haven't put the metrics in was the directions one, because I knew that was coming separately as a separate item today. So that was, we've already started on some of those internal audit improvement recommendations, and you see that in the governance statement report. So apologies, back to the recommendations. The audit committee is asked to note progress on the improvement actions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. So all are sitting at amber on the RAG status is in progress. That there are dates there, and I think we've discussed quite a number of the individual actions and areas as we've gone through today's agenda. So I think I'm happy with that as a progress report. Does anyone else have questions or comments? Patricia?
Thank you. Now, I should have noticed this earlier, but item 7 and item 9 have the same EPIA reference number, 00481. Is that because there was a joint EPIA done on both reports, or is it a typo? Thanks. David, I think
Yeah, just to
that, Chair.
Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for asking that, Patricia. Just to kind of clarify, we have overarching EPIAs. So they're all grouped into the performance, risk and assurance reports, and that was just a pragmatic approach to EPIA improvement, just to save on time. Where there was a standing report item on the agenda, we could just, logically group them into a similar bundle. So you'll probably notice that for quite a lot of the audit committee papers, CCGC papers and standing items for the IJB.
Thank you. I think that's just really helpful for members of the committee to understand that. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. I must admit I hadn't noticed that, so thank you for raising it. That explains it. Okay, are we happy to approve the recommendations then on item 9?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That brings us to the end of the agenda then, unless anyone has anything else that they wish to raise today. No, in that case, I'll thank everyone for their contributions and close the meeting. Thanks very much. See you all soon.
Okay.